women died in the studies, and I think it was in Puerto Rico. And so now we have years of data to be like, I don't think this was the biggest gift to
When?
women. And why are the women the ones responsible for our reproductive getting pregnant or not when sex occurs to people?
Hey guys, it's Megan, and welcome to the How I Healed It podcast. I'm so excited about our interview today. We're doing an expert interview with Hana Ilg. She is an amazing fertility awareness educator and a really good friend of mine. She believes all women deserve to know how their bodies and fertility actually work, and to know that the fertility awareness method, which is also known as FAM, is a wonderful and viable option for birth control and conceiving. She also practices what she teaches, as she used FAM for birth control for 7 years. And then when she was ready to get pregnant, she used FAM to help her conceive. And then used it again for birth control to space her children in a way that worked for her family, which I think is so cool. And Hana is actually the one, she's a really dear friend of mine. We go back, I don't know, how many years do we go back, Hana? A lot of years.
Yeah, at least how long you've been married.
Yeah, so 10 years, at least 10 years. And so her and I became really good friends. And she was the one who opened my eyes to the fact that I didn't have to be on birth control to space out how we wanted to build our family. And it was really mind-blowing to me that I was a married woman and really didn't know much about how my body worked as a woman, what my hormones were doing, or that it was even an option to get off birth control. And if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you'll know my journey with endometriosis. And at the time that Hana and I met, I was actually terrified to get off birth control. I literally thought I might die, because my doctor said that you might die if you get off birth control, because my periods were so heavy. But I actually learned because of FAM, because of Hana educating me about FAM, how my hormones worked and how to help balance things in a way that has really worked for me. And so I feel like this message needs to be brought to women all over the world. I don't know why our gynecologists aren't teaching us this when we're 13 years old. So here we are. We are here to spread the good news and the word about our hormones. So Hana, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yes, it's so fun to be here with you, because this is what we talk about together all the time. So I'm glad other people get to hear.
Yes. Aside from our husbands.
Yes, they do joke that this is all we talk about, periods and vaginas. And
yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
They are not wrong.
It is. You're not wrong.
So, yeah, I'm Hana, like Megan said, and yeah, it's so fun to get to share about this topic of our hormones and fertility and natural birth control options and natural ways to conceive, because like she said, so few women know their true options. And so my story is, when I was 18, I was put on birth control for acne, and I didn't really think anything of it because all my other friends were already on it. Even though I wasn't sexually active. But after a few months, I was just like, I don't like how I feel. I think it's a pill. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, I'm just going to get off of it and see if that helps. And it did help. And so then when I was sexually active years later, I was like, oh, I had that past experience of birth control, of the pill. And I was like, I don't want to go on it again, but I do not want to get pregnant. I was 21. That was not my plan. And I'm a big planner. And yeah, so I was just like, well, I don't really have to use condoms forever either. Like, that doesn't feel like a good option either. And I just felt stuck like that. Those are my two options, and they're both like terrible options.
Yeah.
So a family friend mentioned this thing called fertility awareness method. It's also like natural family planning. It's similar, like it's very similar, just different name. And I laughed at her face. I was like, yeah, isn't that what people used before the pill was invented?
Yeah. And then they had 20 kids.
No thanks.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. And but it just stuck in my mind of like, well, what else? Let me just like look into it. So I literally found like blog posts and like a PDF that I downloaded that like explained this
Wow.
information.
Wow.
And I couldn't deny the science of it. I was like, oh, like this all makes sense of how the body works and the egg and the sperm, like the lifespan, which I will get into a little bit in this conversation as well later, but it just made sense. It was undeniable, the science of it. And so I was like, okay, like, let's do this. And my husband or my fiance at the time was on board, and it was kind of just one of those things like I was still really nervous. And so
Yeah.
that is really why. So years later, once my friends started like seeing like, oh, this is actually working for Hana, and then because they were all doubtful,
Right.
like okay, good luck with that.
We'll be at your baby shower.
Yeah. And I saw, I'm not in that first year, but definitely the first gynecologist said that as well. And then I've had 3 other encounters with gynecologists who had that same vibe of like, see you soon when you're
Wow.
pregnant, or you're playing Russian roulette. And so I was really coming against that, but I just knew, like, I was like, well, I can't deny like this works. And only one person I knew was doing it. I was like, hey, like she's doing it. And so after a few years, my friends were like, okay, Hannah, like it's obviously working for you. How does this work again? Because they were
Yeah.
then curious. And then I started just organically teaching it. And then I was like, you know what? I could really teach this. Like I was
Yeah.
looking for a career change because we're moving abroad. I was like, what can I do online maybe? And this is where I landed because just naturally all my interests are into like women's health now, and I just couldn't get enough information and kept getting asked by people like, teach me.
Why do you think,
So,
I think it's really interesting that, I mean, like you said, you can't deny the science around it, and we're going to get into
mhm.
that. Why do you think that the response from gynecologists, which are doctors who work with women and women's hormones and all of our reproductive organs, why do you
Mhm.
think it is that they don't like that their response is,
Believe it.
okay, see you whenever, yeah, they don't believe in it? Why do you think that is?
It's so discouraging because it's just like, if anybody, they should understand. And so
Yeah,
they obviously understand the science of it. I don't deny that. It just feels like they, and this is even, I've seen all women gynecologists, they don't believe women are capable or smart enough to figure it out.
right.
And I think often, I mean, they have no resources or tools to like give people
Sure, that's
to
true.
go further learn. And so maybe these women who are talking to them are just mentioning like, I'm going to do this method, and they don't actually mean the method I teach, the fertility awareness method.
Right.
Oftentimes they mean the rhythm method. And so I'll just like jump in right now for everybody who's like listening, like, okay, that's what I've been thinking this whole time you've been talking. So we're not talking about the rhythm method, and we're not. So the rhythm method is just your best guess at when you're going to ovulate based on previous cycle lengths. So it's all just your best guess. Whereas fertility awareness method, you're actually identifying exactly when you're fertile. And that is when you can, if you're using it for birth control, you can use condoms or a barrier method or abstain during your fertile phase to use that as birth control. And so that's really the distinction of fertility awareness method, taking your temperature and
Mm,
observing cervical fluid. And those are the 2 biomarkers that tell you exactly when you're fertile. So rhythm method, you're not taking temperature or cervical fluid. You're just like, okay, counting days. You're just like,
got it.
okay, so my cycle is 28 days last cycle, so I'll probably ovulating around cycle day 14. So I'm gonna use a condom like on some days around that. So it's really guesswork. Whereas I can
Right.
know with my cervical fluid and temperature, like I'm, yes, 100%, I'm fertile today. I know that I can answer that question every day. So I
Wow.
think it's really that myth that I think the doctors just don't know. Like, does this woman really know what she's talking about? Or
Right.
is she just like going to go do the rhythm method?
Right.
And so that's benefit of the doubt what I think they're thinking.
Yeah.
But it really is unfair because I really believe all women are
Yeah.
smart enough and capable enough to figure out their fertility. It's actually not that complicated once you're taught it. We
Yes.
just literally were not taught it.
I agree. And as someone this was a completely foreign concept altogether to being educated by you about how our bodies work. It really is, once you know it, it's so simple. It's like you can't unlearn it. Then it's easy to do.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. It's a lack of education and a lack of resources and even there is there's great doctors out there. So I never want to put out the message that I'm just completely anti-doctor, but there are great doctors out there. But there is also the reality that there is this systemic belief within that I've encountered that that you're not an empowered patient no matter what you're going after, that it's just kind of like here, like, well, they're not going to eat well or they're not going to do these lifestyle changes. So instead of even giving you that as an option or educating you at all, they just assume that you're not going to. And so that's why it's so important that we take our health into our own hands and why we educate ourselves. And that's why we have this podcast, is to support you guys on your healing journey. And if you are a female and have reproductive organs, then you need to understand how you are functioning and how to do that naturally without birth control, because birth control is nasty. It's nasty. I mean,
we'll get into it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went there with the doctors too, because what they're trained in is medicine. And so when you come to them with a problem, or even just like, I don't want to get pregnant, like their solution is medicine. And so if you're going to a doctor, you have to understand that's what they're going to prescribe.
Yeah.
So don't go in there thinking like, it's, as much as it's so frustrating, because we know, like, if you're in this health world, like there's so many other things you can do, but that's not their specialty.
No.
And so that's just the reality of it, is they're going to prescribe medicine, and that's why they prescribe birth control, because that's the only tool that they have that they can give you. And then that gets into what you were kind of touching upon, Megan, of the whole system of the pharmaceutical system. It's a monster.
It's a monster.
And that's what we're fighting against. So it's like, why don't we know? Why do we only think birth control is our only option?
Yeah.
It's because we're fighting against this giant pharmaceutical industry monster.
Absolutely, 100%.
They want you to believe it's the only option.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're succeeding.
Yeah, because when we're talking medicine, we're talking synthetic pharmaceutical drugs. It's not like herbal tea medicine. It's pharmaceutical drugs, and part of that is that if they can isolate a compound for any drug, then they can patent it, and then they have the monopoly on making income off of it. Yeah, rather than just going to the original source, like valerian. I was just studying on valerian root recently, and how we know that there's a compound in it that makes us sleepy. If you take enough valerian root, it's stinky, but if you take enough, it'll cause you to fall asleep. And so they have isolated they figured out, the brilliant scientist isolated all the compounds in valerian and then found what is the compound that makes people sleepy and isolate that out, and that's Valium. And so that's all pharmaceuticals don't just come from the thin air. They do actually derive originally from a lot of herbs and plants, which I think is that's a whole nother topic, but that's a whole fascinating conversation all on its own.
And I think that's really the rise of sexual revolution and feminism and the freedom of this. It was such this like amazing scientific discovery of like, this pill can help me not get pregnant, and just having that power to choose when you want to get pregnant was so unheard of and so amazing. And so there's this amazing documentary that just came out I think 2 years ago now, called The Business of Birth Control by Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein. And it documents kind of this like, okay, that was like so revolutionary, but at what cost? And where are we now? How many years later? Like 50 years later.
Right.
And now we're kind of in this post-feminism of like, wait, why is half the population on a medication for something? Why are half like healthy women on a medication for something when they're healthy?
Yeah.
Like, why, wait, hello, wait. Like,
Yeah.
it's like all these alarm bells are ringing now of like, wait, is this really the freedom we thought it was?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so many, I mean, we have so much years. I mean, even in the first studies, the documentary goes into the first studies of how women died in the studies, and I think it was in Puerto Rico, and so now we have years of data to be like, I don't think this was the biggest gift to
When.
women. And why are the women the only ones responsible for
Mhm.
our reproductive, like getting pregnant or not, when sex requires two people, and especially if you're trying to get pregnant, a man and a woman. So, like, this
Which,
is unbalanced.
if I remember correctly, at the time they did actually come up with a birth control for men that you
Mm-hmm.
could take like as a contraceptive, but the men
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't take it. And the women do.
There was too many side effects.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
that is, I think women are really coming awake to, like, why am I the one dealing with the side effects every single day when I'm only fertile? Women are technically, we can get into the
Yeah,
science
let's do
now,
it.
technically only fertile for one day. And so, yeah, I can jump into that part of the science of
Great.
fertility of women ovulate on one day, but we have a fertile phase because it's actually dependent on the lifespan of the sperm. And so sperm can survive in fertile cervical fluid for like 3 to 5 days. If you don't have fertile cervical fluid, then they can die within a few hours. And so they can basically, if you have sex on Monday and you have fertile cervical fluid, which is a fluid your cervix produces, it can be like creamy, like egg white. It can start off as like sticky. It progresses in that fertile window to like the most fertile. That is what nourishes sperm and keeps them alive for those possible 3 to 5 days until that egg is finally released. So if you have sex on Monday and you have fertile cervical fluid, those sperm can survive in the cervix and the cervical crypts until Friday when that egg is actually released from the ovary. And
Wow.
so still, like, really, women are only like releasing that egg for one day, but it's the lifespan of the sperm that gives us like a window of usually around 6 days. And men are fertile every single day.
So
So it's not really fair.
So what is happening in our hormones? So can you explain all the different phases of our cycle
Mm-hmm.
and what happens from day one, which is the day we begin bleeding, to whenever
Mm-hmm.
the end of our cycle is, and then how you're able to, with the fertility awareness, pinpoint that moment of ovulation, and then what do you do? Let's talk about this towards those who are actively not wanting to get pregnant. How would they prevent?
Yeah, so I hope you're all auditory learners because you're listening to a podcast. But if you need a visual, I do have like a free mini course on like the intro to charting your cycle. Because it is nice to see like the cycle and when you're fertile and the ups and downs of the different hormones. So if you are somebody who wants to see it, you can go grab that. Megan will send
Yeah, I'll
have all
make
the
sure to
links for
put
you.
all that, in the show notes.
You can kind of follow along, but I can explain it auditorily as well. So the first day of your cycle is the first day of your period, like a moderate to heavy bleed. And that is your both. I'm going to just talk about estrogen and progesterone. There's other hormones going on in our bodies and our cycle, but we're going to keep it simple for these explaining purposes. And that first half of your cycle is called the follicular phase, and that's can lead up until the ovulatory phase. You have menstrual phase, follicular phase, and then the ovulatory phase. That's the first half of your cycle. Um, but that actually it's not a perfect half. So I like to dispel the myth that our cycle is 28 days with ovulation happening on day 14. So when I give an example of a cycle, there's no numbers on it. A healthy cycle can be anywhere from 25 to 35 days. And you as an individual woman, it can fluctuate slightly. And that doesn't mean you're irregular. If you're really fluctuating outside the 25 to 35 days and you have big, long gaps of like 45 days, that's an irregular cycle, or there's other signs as well. Uh, but 25 to 35 is healthy, and ovulation can move as well, depending on if you're sick or stressed. Our body wants to try to get us pregnant every cycle. And so if you're like, oh, you're sick, you're not going to be having sex, so let's delay ovulation a bit. So that's why that first half isn't a perfect half, because ovulation can be delayed. And that's why we don't use the rhythm method, because if you're just guessing, you're not going to know. But if you're actually charting cervical fluid and temperature, you will know that it was delayed. And so that's the first half of your cycle. And the main hormone in the first half is estrogen. So estrogen is rising and rising until it peaks, and then it will trigger ovulation. Mm-hmm. So that's, and estrogen is this amazing hormone of has high energy, high creativity, connectivity. So that's really fun concept of cycle syncing too. I don't know if we'll get into all that. I have another guide, a free guide all about cycle syncing, but just like there's different hormones make you feel differently in different parts of your cycle.
Cycle syncing, if we have time, I would love to touch on that, because that is something I also learned from you, and that has been life-changing. It's like being aware of cycle syncing. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. And then the second half of your cycle after ovulation is the luteal phase, and that your estrogen kind of lowers after ovulation, and then progesterone rises. And progesterone is more of a cozy, inward, nesting hormone, and that is the second half. And that is actually also when I keep mentioning taking your temperature is following that. We're trying to see that progesterone rise. And so your temperature in the morning will also rise after ovulation. And it's kind of like a hen sitting on an egg. Like progesterone warms your body a little bit, just in case that egg was fertilized, and keeps your body a little warmer. And
that's so cool.
And estrogen, progesterone do so many other things. I'm just kind of gliding through it. But that's how you can basically, when we're talking about, like you wanted to talk about specifically birth control, that first half of your cycle, now I have to really dig into cervical fluid and temperature. So that was kind of an overview of the cycle and the hormones.
Great.
And
so we have the beginning. A little recap. So we have the beginning of our cycle, which is our menstrual phase, and that can last anywhere between 4 to 6 days.
Yeah.
Depending on the woman.
6 days, 3 to 7.
And then right after that, so that's the menstrual goes into follicular. Is that before or is that after menstrual?
After.
So, okay.
So menstrual's first, then follicular.
Then follicular. And that's when our follicles release the egg, and it begins the
follicles growing in follicular phase. And ovulation is right when it is actually released.
Got it. Okay. So menstrual, 4 to 6 days, follicular. That means there's a follicle on your ovary that is growing. And then during ovulation, that egg is now mature and it is released into the fallopian tube, and it begins its travel down. And oftentimes that's where the sperm and egg meet, and then could have the potential of getting fertilized and turning into an embryo. And so if you're wanting to avoid pregnancy, it's the 5 days before. It's actually because of our endometriosis and infertility journey, we haven't had to use this method in quite some time. So is it how many days before and how many days after are you using a barrier method to prevent?
Yeah, so that's all dependent on cervical fluid. So that's the next thing we can just like jump into.
Let's
so
dive
cervical
in.
Fluid is all about telling you when you're entering your fertile phase, and then temperature is all about telling you when you're exiting your fertile phase. And that is the definition basically of the fertility awareness method. So that's the type of method that I teach, and it's using those two fertility biomarkers. And so in that first follicular phase, right after menstruation, you're basically looking for cervical fluid to appear. And so our vaginas are a mucous membrane, and so they are always kind of damp, moist. I describe it like if you touch the inside of your cheek, and it's a little damp. But the difference between cervical fluid is it's actually something you can rub between your fingers, and it's just when you wipe with toilet paper or you look at your underwear. It kind of progresses in consistency from kind of sticky, gummy, there's lots of descriptive words, then to like creamy or lotiony or milky, and then to like literal egg whites, like when you crack an egg, like really slippery, clear, stretchy. And all of those are fertile. And so if you see any of those, if you're using this for birth control, you want to use protection when you're seeing fertile cervical fluid. And then it'll kind of dry up after ovulation. And so you can, and some people there, if they have short cycles, cervical fluid can get masked in the last few days of your period. So when you hear people like, I got pregnant on my period, it's usually they have really short cycles, like the 25-day cycle. So you just have to, whenever I'm teaching in my course, I would say like, don't use this for birth control for at least 3 months until you have some cycles to look at and be like, do you have a short cycle? Should you be on the lookout those last few days of your period? Or some people will have dry days after their period until cervical fluid begins. And dry days just means, again, what I said, like when you touch the inside of your cheek, like the vagina, it's just like damp. There's nothing you can really rub between your fingers as cervical fluid.
Really great description.
Yeah, so then that's all the way until ovulation. And then after the egg's released, if it doesn't become fertilized, it just dies and reabsorbs into the body. And then that follicle that was growing, actually, that released the egg, actually becomes, it's called the corpus luteum. That's why that second half of your cycle is called the luteal phase. And that's what's creating all that progesterone. And
so you have 3 different names for the first phase of your cycle and then one name for the second phase.
Yeah, kind of.
Just to kind of keep it. Okay. Great.
Yeah. And, so that's, I think I already mentioned the temperature. It's just like when you wake up in the morning, there's some special, like, best practices that I go over in my course, but really it's just like when you wake up in the morning, take your temperature by mouth. You don't have to do it vaginally. And it's a specific basal thermometer. So it's not a fever thermometer. And the difference is it's just more sensitive and measures like a 1/10 of a degree. And because it's like little shift, it's clear when you have it in a chart. And it's like 97.3, 97.2, 97.5. And then it jumps to like 98 or 97.8, 97.9. And then it'll stay high. And that's how you know, like, okay, that means my temperature rose. That means that progesterone has risen. That means that egg is no longer in the ovary. It's gone. I am completely infertile during this phase.
Which then you can have all the fun you want.
Yeah. And there are days you can have unprotected sex before ovulation as well, as long as you have dry days and don't see cervical fluid, fertile cervical fluid. And so those days, that sperm is going to die within a few hours. It can't survive. And there's also, they can't survive that many days until the egg is released.
Yeah, really good. And you can whenever you were teaching this to me the first time, I was like, oh, I have to get the special thermometer. Where on earth would you even get one? And you can just go to Target. Like Target has them, or Amazon nowadays. They're just available and easy to find.
And if you do go into a pharmacy, they're usually near the condoms and pregnancy tests, not by the fever thermometers.
Good. That's that's actually good for people to know. That's
and
really good.
Do not use a fever thermometer. It's just
not accurate enough. Don't do it.
Yeah.
No need. They're like $10 to get one.
They're like $15. Yeah. So they're very affordable. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So good. I love it. Okay. Can we talk a little bit, like just touch a little bit more on birth control?
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine primarily women are listening to this particular podcast interview. I hope some men are listening to it as well, but women will be a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more acutely aware of what we've gone through ourselves with birth control, what we have seen our girlfriends go through with birth control. I'm sure there are a slew of stories. Trying different birth controls was hell. It was awful. It
Mm-hmm.
can really destroy your hormones and your mental and emotional state if you're not on the right one, because that was my first
Mm-hmm.
experience with birth control. I was just like rageful, angry and rageful on my first attempt on pharmaceutical contraceptive birth, like the pill. And then
Mm-hmm.
I switched to a different one that worked well with my body, and I wasn't rageful anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've seen friends end up in the hospital with blood clots in their legs. I know one girl, and it was confirmed that it was because of her birth control, but she literally had a psychotic break. She had to take
Mm-hmm.
2 years off of college and delay that. It is life threatening. And so, even if it is your choice to do a contraceptive like the pill, or now they have all these birth controls that you can insert into your
Yeah.
body, different places, it's really important to know the risks. And that is just not talked about enough.
It's literally not like I'm so pro informed consent, which is what doctors are taught to do. But when you go into the office, they just say, okay, you can do the pill or the IUD or the patch, or no one really uses the patch anymore. I'm going to talk about the most popular ones that I hear people talk about currently. Why did I say the ring? So like the Nuva ring. So these are the ones I hear the most. The pills still, obviously there's different types of pill even. There's like the mini pill, which is just a progestin only pill, or the one that has estrogen and progesterone. And again, it's synthetic estrogen and progestin. It's not naturally occurring hormones. And uh, then we have, IUDs. There's also two different types of IUDs and different brands, obviously, but there's the hormonal IUD and there is a copper non-hormonal IUD. And then there's the Nuva ring. Those are the three most popular currently. And then obviously there's patch, the insertion in your arm. So I'm just going to kind of talk about the most popular ones and a little bit of pros and cons of them all and just the
Great.
difference of them all.
Yeah.
Because that is the definition of informed consent, that you understand how they all work.
So good.
Now you know how fertility awareness method works, which never gets mentioned in the doctor's office as an option. So it's not true informed consent if you don't know all your options.
Really good. That's a really good point to highlight there.
Yeah. So let's start with the pill. What that's doing, and this is similar to even some hormonal IUDs, but it's shutting off your natural form of estrogen and progesterone and administering synthetic forms in a different range. I wish you could kind of see. So imagine the like chart of your hormones. Estrogen kind of goes up like a bell curve and then goes down on the second half of your cycle, and progesterone's low in the first half and goes up in the second half. So it's kind of like they alternate going up and down like camel's back.
Nice.
And the pill is shutting that down completely and administering more of a flat line. So estrogen doesn't go too high. Again, if you remember, that's like the feel good, sexy connection hormone. And so that's how I didn't mention this in my beginning part of my story, how I felt on the pill. I did feel depressed, which is the number one side effect I hear from women.
You did or you did not?
I didn't feel depressed,
Did
even
not.
though that is I did not. Even though that is the number one side effect I hear, I felt suppressed. I just felt a little lower.
Flat.
Than my little flatter, which is exactly what it's doing to your hormones.
Wow.
So it makes sense once you see it. I was like, oh, that. And I didn't figure that out until years later.
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
what it was
I
doing.
felt that
I didn't
way.
know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then it makes sense why you would even go into depression as well. Uh, and then there are some of the IUDs, you are still ovulating, but it like thins the lining of your uterus so an egg can't implant. And in the case of like a copper IUD, it's also causing a lot of inflammation. And so the biggest side effects I hear, like so many people are like, oh, I want a hormone-free birth control option. I have yet to hear of anybody who liked their copper IUD because it sounds like so great. Like, oh, a non-hormonal option
So
that's
it's
still an
just
IUD.
copper. It's just copper that you're.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's such thing as copper toxicity, and it just creates a lot of inflammation. And so doctors don't really recommend that one if you have heavy periods because it'll make them heavier.
Oh, awful. That sounds
So it's just like,
terrible.
why? Yeah. And like, so many reports of just like bleeding for weeks.
Oh
Yeah.
my
And just
gosh.
like,
Which
it's
that
just a
alone, the
period.
iron deficiency is going to have long-term health ramifications. To
Yeah.
get your iron
And
back
just,
up, it's not easy.
and then how long women stick it out. Like, maybe it'll balance out. Maybe it'll balance out. And I know I was just at a workshop I just taught locally. It was just like, someone was like, I gave it a year and then I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, why did you give it a
Wow.
year? Like, that was too long. Like,
Well,
after like a few
not to
cycles.
not to interject too much, but I will say that
Mm-hmm.
whenever I went on the first pill that did not work for me,
Mm-hmm.
the doctor was really pressuring me to stay on it longer. And I mean, I was at
Mm-hmm.
the 2 and 3 month and my roommate, because I was just like angry all the time. She was like, you need to change your birth control or you cannot live here. Like, this is not
Wow.
working. And so I went back to my gyno and I was like, this is not working. Like, it's not just affecting me now. It is affecting the people that I
Mm-hmm.
love. And she was still she was like, you need to give it more time, you need to give it more time, which to me that is pressure, because I'm gonna like,
Mm-hmm.
you want to listen to your doctor as a good patient, but I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, no, I really
Mm-hmm.
can't. I really need you to change it. So sometimes even if we have well-intending doctors, they are not living in your body, and you do need to
Yeah.
advocate for yourself and say, no, this is not working for me. And
Yep.
so I don't know what that person was going through with their doctor, but if you are in a similar situation to what mine was, just stand up for yourself. You can say no to the doctor, and
Mm-hmm.
if they're mean to you about it, find
Yeah.
a new doctor.
And that's what's hard about the IUD. You have to schedule an appointment for it to be removed. I've had a friend who removed her own because she just was just like, yeah,
Whoa,
I wouldn't recommend
that's
that. But
dangerous.
yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't recommend that. But you know, like if you can't get an appointment for a while, and she was just done. And so that is, yeah, the pro of the IUD is that it can stay in for so long you don't ever have to think about it. The con is you can't just get it out. You can't just stop taking
Yeah.
the pill. And I always give my clients a pep talk, like, because some people will take my course before even getting their IUD out, just to like make sure. Sometimes you just need all the knowledge
Yeah.
to be like, okay, this is gonna work. Like,
Yes.
this is the method I'm gonna use. And then they go get their IUD removed before actually using the method and before using FAM. And I'm always just like, stand strong. They're gonna try to convince you to keep it in, unless you play this card of like, I want to get pregnant.
Right.
Even if you don't want to, that's an easy card. If you want to play that card, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm ready to get pregnant, and then they're like, sure, let's take it out. But
It's
if
real.
you say,
And then
I
you can be
don't want to
like,
get
bye.
pregnant, yeah, don't use them for your birth. Yeah,
It's so good.
if, down the road, if that's what you choose. So, I feel like I went through kind of. Sorry, it's kind of all over the place.
Oh
The
no,
pill,
that's really good.
IUD,
Yeah. And then the ring.
really often, yeah, the ring, the business of birth control documentary really goes into following two families who lost their daughters from the nuclear ring. So that
Wow.
like also has really serious side effects. And I even have had people come to my workshop, or I've done some screenings of that documentary, and they, they use the NuvaRing, and they still were, even after seeing that, it's still just like, well, it's working for me. Like, if you're willing to, it's your risk analysis. Um, but for some, it's just like, no, that's not worth the risk. And I
And do
don't
you
think that's worth
I,
the risk. But the
I
pill and IUD, it's not just the ring. The pill and IUD also has that same. They died from blood clots, like you were saying your friend had.
Right.
So
Okay, so
that's
it's a
one of the
blood
highest.
clot thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know why? Because I do not know why. Birth control and messing with your hormones and synthetic birth controls cause blood clots. Do you know why
No, not
that is?
really.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Mm-mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you watch any pharmaceutical commercial,
Some
it's
of
just
the
a
side
slew
effects.
of side
Yeah.
effects. So
Yeah.
I am now under the belief that if at all possible, to not use pharmaceuticals because there are side
Mm-hmm.
effects to all
Mm-hmm.
of them, from aspirin to birth control to some of the
Mm-hmm.
bigger drugs, if at all possible. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
can't. There are situations that a pharmaceutical can be life-saving.
Yeah.
But
And I'm really big on not having, sorry, I interrupted you.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
Not having women suffer. And so I think it is a tool if you are suffering, like, when you had your first surgery of endometriosis, and like if you're not ready to make the lifestyle changes and or to learn an alternative method, like as long as I just think birth control is a temporary, like a medication, it's to fix a problem short term. And then it's just not like how we're utilizing the pill now. One of my biggest issues is how young girls are put on it and how
Yes.
long they stay on it for. And so your risks and of side effects go way up the longer you are on it.
Yeah.
And so if it is a viable option for you and you know the risk, and that's okay for however long you need until you can get something else in place, like it really is a wonderful tool.
Right.
And that's why, we're thankful for the pharmaceutical
Right.
industry for some drugs that do help make our life easier. But then it just gets all perverted and distorted, and you shouldn't be on it from 13 until menopause.
Which a
And just
lot of
taking
girls
breaks.
are.
Oh, that is the norm. You just take a break
Yeah.
for a few years when you're want to get pregnant, and then get right back on it. 6 weeks postpartum. That 6 week check
I
after
did not
postpartum
know
after
that.
giving birth. It's literally like you have so many visits while you're pregnant with your whoever you choose to go with, an OB or a midwife. And midwives do, I think, a few visits postpartum usually. OBs do one. They do your 6 week check, and it's just to get you back on birth control.
Really?
I mean, you can complain about some things if things aren't healing or whatever,
Sure.
but really it's just to get that prescription.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
wild. I did not know that.
And then
That's
you get back
crazy.
on it until the next baby. But this is all best case scenario, that you stop the pill, get pregnant, get on it again,
Yeah.
stop it again, get pregnant again right away.
Yeah.
Like that's
There are also
I'm using air quotes here. I'm just realizing because we are doing a video recording, but
Yes.
also people listen to this audio, quote unquote, best case scenario.
Yes, absolutely. There are also so many other ramifications to taking birth control. Oh, I mean, the long-term effects, without this can't be refuted. It does increase your chances of getting different types of cancer as a woman if you've been on it for any length of time. Even if you've only taken 1 or 2 pills, it increases your chance of cancer, let alone all these. I was on birth control for 2 or more years. And so many girls I knew got on it when they were 12 or 13 because they had acne, and then they were on it until they were ready to get pregnant. And then I have friends who think that the birth control was the reason why they haven't been able to get pregnant. I don't know. I think I am doubtful enough of the pharmaceutical industry that even if they know that. Oh, do you? Okay, go ahead. I would love to hear your answer.
My theory on why birth control affects infertility rates is women are put on it so young for cycle irregularities. And our cycles are always trying to tell us something. Our period is your monthly report card. And if it was sending you signals, so we're just getting reports of like hormone imbalances in young girls and teens once they get their period, because we know all the things, the diet they're eating, the environmental factors, the personal care products they're using. It's a slew of hormone disrupting chemicals that they come in contact with, and causing hormone imbalances. then they get put on the pill, and those things never get addressed. And even things, greater things than just those things I mentioned, like endometriosis, like PCOS, get they just get shut down for a little while.
Yes, that is true.
But as soon as you stop taking the pill or whatever type of birth control, it can come back. It's just nothing was actually healed. It was just a Band-Aid.
100%. That was so well said. I love that. And then not to mention, when you take birth control and you pee it out, it ends up in our tap water, because there are in tap water traces of all different types of pharmaceuticals, and birth control is absolutely in tap water, which is why it's so important to have a really good water filter system. If you can't afford a whole house water filter system, getting a water distiller or a Berkey filter or something to begin to filter out, a good charcoal filter to begin to filter out some of those pharmaceuticals. Because yuck, because that's, and what is that doing to our children who are drinking that tap water and then growing? All of these are the factors that are messing up our hormones if we're just drinking. And then now I know that men's sperm from just our parents' time, so my dad was born in the late 50s, to the men nowadays, they've literally lowered what is considered normal sperm count for men by 50% since the 50s and 60s. So now let's say you're on an infertility journey.
Bad about your low numbers.
Exactly.
Compensate the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go with your husband to an infertility clinic or a fertility clinic to get his sperm checked, and they might be telling you his sperm looks healthy and normal, and really it could be at 50% of what your dad's was, because it's just gotten so bad across the board that they had to completely change what is considered normal. That's really concerning. That should be a loud thing that we are talking about all over the place, because it concerns all of humanity, and it's not something that's discussed, because there's just so much to that would have to change.
Yeah, I would love that. It's like a perfect jumping point to like switch gears to trying to conceive, and how fertility awareness method could help in that, because I'm always I remind my clients, but it takes two to get pregnant. And so if you've been charting, with cervical fluid and temperature using FAM, and you haven't gotten pregnant in like 3 to 4 months, first step, get him tested. Do not wait.
Yes.
I think so many people wait because there's this thing of like, oh, let's try for a year. That's just for normal people who are just having sex. They don't know when, but if you are actually timing intercourse correctly according to those fertility biomarkers and charting your cycle with FAM, you should be getting you will be getting so much data about your cycle. And either something might show that's off for your cycle, that you can start addressing, or everything looks great and you're like, buddy, go get your sperm tested.
Because 50% of infertility is men and 50% is women, roughly, right?
Yes.
So I think one thing that makes me angry, having been on our prolonged fertility journey for 8 years, is that immediately it is the woman's fault. It is just culturally immediately, oh, she can't get pregnant. But have you got 50% of the time, it's the guy. It might be I have endometriosis, so obviously I've got some health things going on. But the reality is that you need to check both. A lot of women will just get themselves checked and be like, well, I'm fine. And so it can also be the man. And 50% of the time it is. Yeah. And so that's really important to know. Those are the little things that I guess the inner feminist in me gets really angry about, because I'm like, why is it the woman's fault? Instantly, why do we go there 100% of the time? Let's check both avenues.
Definitely.
So what are some because this is right. So we're learning about this. You offer a course. So if you guys
Mm-hmm.
are listening, she has an amazing course. It's beautifully filmed and it's really thorough. You'll learn everything about how your body works and tips and how to take your temperature and what the
Yeah.
cervical mucus looks like if you need a visual, because you just kind of really want to know you're doing it well. What are just some habit changes and what does it look like? Let's on a day-to-day basis to use the fertility awareness method.
Yeah. It literally takes me seconds. Just take, well, I guess 1 minute to take my temperature in the morning. And then it's really just creating a habit of checking for cervical fluid when you go to the bathroom. It's just a matter of like, we're so used to pee, wipe, and run, and you're not paying attention. Or you've been on birth control for so long that it dries up your cervical fluid. So you haven't been seeing it. You're not in the habit of seeing it. And so it's really just getting the habit of pausing for literally a second and checking your toilet paper and
Right.
your underwear every time you go to the bathroom. Unless after you've confirmed ovulation, then you're in the clear.
Yeah.
But those are the two habit changes. And so it really isn't hard. It's just about, and I do teach through an app, but it's not a predictive app. Like you would like, there's apps where it would be like, you're gonna be fertile these days. And so that's not the type of app I use. It's literally just inputting temperature and cervical fluid, and then you have to interpret it and know how to interpret it to know when you're fertile. And so that's what I go over. I have two separate courses for charting for birth control and charting to conceive. You're learning the same method, but it's just how I speak to you is so different because those are very different goals. The
Yes.
fears of somebody who's trying not to get pregnant is very different than the heartache and struggle of somebody who's trying to get pregnant. And so
Absolutely.
that's why I have two separate courses. So it is the same method. You just flip it. Use
Really good.
for birth control. I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, that it's 99.6% effective for birth control.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
important.
it's high. And that is if you're abstaining during your fertile phase. And then if you opt to use a barrier method, the most common one that my clients use and that I use personally is condoms during your fertile phase. And that has a 98% effectiveness rate. As long as you're comfortable with that during your fertile phase, that is the rates of it. And it's really a matter of to get that effectiveness rate, to learn it correctly and thoroughly and with an instructor. And so that's
Really
why
good.
in my course, the first module is all about like the science. The second one is like literally how to chart, how to observe those fertility biomarkers. And the third is a lot of like lifestyle and lifestyle changes, diet changes, holistic hormonal health to help in the journey.
So good.
And yeah, and it's like about 3 hours of content. So it's quick to just get through it. And then it includes a one-on-one with me. Both courses include a one-on-one with me. And that's so you chart for like 2 cycles. So we have some charts to review together. And that's when
Awesome.
that's when all like the confidence, it's all about getting that confidence.
Right.
Because you could just read a book, read a blog, follow people on TikTok and Instagram, and have a general idea of how the
Yeah.
method works. But once you actually have your own data to see it, to interpret it, and be like, I'm going to use it for birth control when you are serious about not getting pregnant, that's a big leap to make. And you want
It
to make
is.
sure you have your questions answered and that confidence level. So that's really my goal in the courses. And even when you're trying to conceive, it's that confidence of like, I'm timing this correctly. I'm doing the things I can to optimize conceiving. And then I cover a lot of other things you can do to help on the fertility journey.
Really good. That's so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
What I do love about it, because when I would mention it to people when I was really actively doing fam for birth control, I remember talking to my other girlfriends about it because I'm like, nobody knows. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
one gal responded with just like, oh, it's just so much work. And I was like, it literally is not more work than making sure that I have my pill that I've taken every day. It's like you just make sure you take your temperature in the morning and you
Mm-hmm.
just do it right before you get out of bed and it's done. Like you just
Yeah.
pop the thermometer in, rather
I think
than,
the biggest thing is the upfront learning curve. And so
yeah,
it does take those first, I say, 3 cycles till you get to that confidence level of using it for
yes,
birth control. And so I think that is the work, quote unquote, I'm using quotes,
right.
air quotes again, quote unquote work. Uh, Once you have put in those first 3 months of learning and practicing charting, it becomes second nature. I do not have
Yeah.
to think about it. It is so effortless now. And that is the difference of learning it thoroughly and correctly the first go around.
Hmm.
And so you're not constantly like, like, I'm
And
not
then
sure, am I fertile today or not?
how empowering for moms to be
Mm-hmm.
able to teach their daughters about their bodies. I would have
Yeah,
loved to have known this earlier in my life. And then your daughters will not have a learning curve because you're just teaching them
yeah.
as you've done it, which I think is really cool as well.
I always
So,
say
mhm,
every woman deserves to know it's an option and know how it works, know how their body works. You might choose at different stages of your life to use a different form of birth control, but you will never regret learning how to chart your cycle with
so
BAM.
good. That was
And it
so
will
well said.
affect generations to come for sure.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So, so good. So I will make sure to put all of the resources and things that we talked about, particularly with your FAM course and everything in the show notes. Before we close though, I would love to touch on cycle
Oh, yes.
syncing.
Hmm.
Can we touch on cycle syncing?
Yes. And so it's this concept of aligning your different activities in life according to your cycle and what your hormones are doing in different phases of your cycle. And so this is things like diet, exercise, and like your social life. And so in your menstrual phase, your progesterone, estrogen are at their lowest. And so it's a good time of rest, walking. In my cycle syncing guide, that's free. It'll list out foods that are good for each cycle. And this is all based on, you mentioned you love this book, Woman Code by Lisa Vitti. And it's a great book. So she kind of coined the term. And so that's menstrual phase. Follicular phase, your estrogen is rising. It's more a great time for creativity and kind of brainstorming or more intense workouts. And then ovulatory is when your estrogen is at the highest you can do, like really push yourself in workouts or go out with your girlfriends, have hot sex. Like it's just like you're just like in the mood for all the things. And then your luteal phase is again kind of like mellowing and lowering. You get more. Sometimes at the right before your period, you can get more like detail oriented again. Like if you find yourself like cleaning out your junk drawer, like you're probably gonna start your period soon. And yeah, yoga, walking, things like that are great during that phase of your cycle. That's kind of
Man,
it in a gist.
I love that book, The Woman Code, and I love the whole concept around cycle syncing. And why I said earlier it was so life-changing for me is every woman has these fluctuations in our hormones and they affect how our brain chemistry works. So if at all and when at all possible, what I've learned to do is if I have like a big social engagement that I want to plan or a meeting, a really important meeting, if it is all, life is happening. So sometimes you can't schedule things perfectly according to your cycle and your phases every single month. But when it is within my power, I will schedule things that I need a lot of energy for that follicular and ovulatory phase, because I know that my brain is just going to be able to take those things on so much better. And then when you become aware of it, for me, it took away a lot of the shame around my hormones and what my body was doing naturally, because these are good and beautiful fluctuations that are happening. It does not mean that your body is broken because you are feeling less social. And at a certain point, and before I never knew that I was consistently feeling less social right before my period showed up. I wasn't recognizing that until I became aware of how my hormones worked, how they fluctuated. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, cool. Like I'm just not going to plan social things right before my period. And also, I'll get really indecisive. Like for me, that's one of the things that happens. I'm usually a really decisive person. But the moment that I start having a hard time making decisive decisions about what we're eating tonight or what to make for dinner or that kind of thing, I know I'm like, oh, okay, my hormones are shifting and I'm entering into this other phase. And instead of feeling guilty and shameful about it, I can actually be prepped for that and have stuff in the freezer ready to go. And so it's just elevated my life in a way that every woman should know and be empowered to make those changes in their life to just live in a way that feels better. So yeah, I love that. Cool. Awesome. All right. Let me look through my questions and see if there's anything else that we missed. I think we covered most everything. Is there any other resources or books that you didn't mention that you would like to make sure our listeners have before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I think if you want to chart for birth control or try to conceive, like definitely my course is the go-to. And then I love offering some books that are for like hormone balance and lifestyle and diet changes to go along with that, because that is, it's just so great to have those resources of like, I'll name two. So we already mentioned the Women Code, get that for cycle thinking.
So
Wonderfulness. The Period Repair Manual by Dr. Laura Bryden is great. And so that's like really great. Like you can go look up, like I'm having heavy periods. I'm having irregular cycles, and she'll give you recommendations to do according to those symptoms you're seeing.
Awesome.
And Taking Charge of Your Fertility is the Bible of fertility awareness methods.
Nice.
So it's great to have. It's thick. So my course is just like that's basically the book, but just telling you.
But you don't have to read the whole thing. Yeah.
You don't have to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's a great resource to have if you have like questions or have to go back to something. And I always say like it's so nice to have a video course because your partner can like watch it too.
Yes.
And you don't have to watch the whole thing. Like even just like I tell you what parts, like this part is important for him to watch. So you don't have to read a whole book. Like that's not very realistic. And so it's nice to have those resources.
That's awesome.
So the Period Repair Manual and Woman Code, I really love those too.
Really good. Well, thank you for being a forerunner and doing the scary thing and trying something new and then making an amazing course that spells it out, makes it super easy for us to understand and to translate. Hana is an amazing teacher, as you've experienced. So it's really awesome, all the work that you've done. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Hana.
It's what I created. I wish I had it when I first started.
Yes.
And I created a discount code for y'all too. So Megan will put that in.
Awesome.
And so you can grab it.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you guys and tune in for our next podcast. All right. Bye.